Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we've got an episode of Spare Change. Some episodes just don't fit in any of my other playlists, so this is where they end up. The topics on these episodes can vary pretty widely, so stay tuned to see what's in store for this one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. So today's episode, I'm going to be talking about my own personal collection. Many of you have asked me, hey Mitch, what decks do you actually own and play in person? So I'm going to do an episode on that. Basically, I'm going to go through all the decks I have, talk about why I personally like them. I'm going to give a tiny, overview on what they do. Each of these I have done a deck tech on, except I believe one, and I'll talk about why on that one here in a bit. But yeah, I'm going to go through these decks one at a time, talk about why I like them, and yeah, hope this kind of gives you some insight as to kind of what decks I personally like to own and play. Obviously, Commander collections kind of, expand and contract throughout the years for many people. I started off having, obviously one deck. I think at most I've had 16 or so, but I've kind of pared it down a little bit. I like to have just I think I've got 9 right now. I think it's a decent amount. You've got some flexibility, but you also, aren't, not playing a deck for 4 months and then, being like, oh, how does this thing work again? So yeah, there's definitely some that I rotate in and out. But yeah, at this point, these are the 9 decks that I currently own. So let's jump into it. The first one is going to be Kenneth, the Return King. And actually, I probably shouldn't even flash this up because it'll probably shine on the screen. But I'll put it up, probably here-ish. There'll be a card. But anyway, Kenneth, Return King is a 5/5 human noble. Costs 4 and a white. He's got a lot of abilities. Let's go through them quick. Pay red, all creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. Pay 1 and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Pay 2 and a white, target player gains 5 life. Pay 3 and a blue, target player draws a card. And pay 4 and a black, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. So Kenneth is kind of like a toolbox commander. I know that it can be definitely built in a competitive way. I'm not sure exactly what tier it is in CDH, but it's pretty high up there, I believe. Because essentially if you get infinite mana, you just win. I'm not trying to do that with this deck. This deck, I want to be kind of more of a toolbox commander again, where we utilize his abilities in the most effective ways that we can. The ones that are most important to me, at least that I was kind of focusing on when I was building the deck, are the +1/+1 counters on target creature, player gaining 5 life, and reanimating creatures from the graveyard. Essentially trying to find the best ways to abuse those cards. So Buried Alive is a great card for this deck because essentially just gets you 3 creature cards directly into your graveyard. So it gets you the right creatures that you want to to reanimate. It can get you that perfect card, as if it's, if you need a Spore Frog, you've got yourself a Spore Frog to fog over and over and over again. Biomancer's Familiar is a fantastic card in the deck to get, obviously, because it reduces Kenris activation costs. So then, or by 2 for each of them. So some of them go down to 1. Some are down to 2 or 3. So yeah, it just really makes a huge difference and saves you a lot. So other than Buried Alive, another good tutor to have in the deck is Final Parting. Gets you 1 into your hand and 1 to the graveyard. So again, if you need to cast something, you can. If you want to get something back from the graveyard with Kenneth, you can. Merciless Executioner is another good thing to target with that. Again, you can just keep getting it back over and over again and just making every single person sacrifice a creature every single time you do so. And then Dauntless Escort is a great one also to get if you want to protect your board. So again, just basically kind of you want to get to a point where you've got a ton of value going on. You've ramped, you've gotten ways to really abuse Kenris effects. Again, that Biomancer's Familiar is great where you're reducing the cost of your abilities. So you can just keep doing over and over again. You can get a ton of creatures back. You can keep fogging, you can keep saving your creatures, so on and so forth. That +1/+1 counters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. You're not really just trying to like build up one big creature. What you want to do with that one, for this deck at least, is to abuse that targeting effect with something like Willbreaker, which says whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes the target of a spell or ability you control, gain control of that creature for as long as you control Willbreaker. So you get Willbreaker out, you start targeting your opponent's creatures, putting counters on them, and gaining control of them. So again, just finding the best ways to utilize those abilities with Kenneth really can make him very effective as a toolbox commander. And then, obviously, something like Wilderness Reclamation is fantastic in this deck. Just basically untapping your lands at the end of your turn so you can just use this stuff over and over again. And then, finally, a way to really utilize that gain life ability. Yes, you can use on yourself, obviously, to sustain and to stay alive. But actually, it can be a good way to finish your opponents off too, with something like Tainted Remedy, which says if an opponent would gain life, that player loses that much life instead. Basically, you're paying 3 mana to drain your opponents for 5. That's a really good deal. And again, if you have Biomancer's Familiar or something like that out, you're draining everyone, or you're draining opponents for 1 mana. 1 mana drains your opponent for 5, which is just huge. So that's Kenneth. I really like Kenneth because he's a very kind of flexible commander. You can use it to help opponents out as well. And use it in a very political way. You can try to control the board, but your opponents, if they played it before, they might kind of know what you're doing. So, again, just the amount of value that he can provide you is huge. Let's move on to the next one, which is one of my favorite recent ones, which is Ghalta, Primal Hunger. I decided to take this in a different direction than I've seen many people take it. I decided to go with vehicles. Basically, let's go through Ghalta quickly. Ghalta is a 12/12 Elder Dinosaur with Trample. That costs 10 green. It costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. Basically, the problem with Ghalta is if you get a bunch of creatures out there that might have, low toughness, high power, they cost not a lot, which is the build that you usually see out there. If someone board wipes, you're in trouble. It sets you back a ton. You really want to get creatures out there that are durable, and vehicles actually is the way that I decided to go, because vehicles are really durable and really hard to deal with, because vehicles aren't creatures unless you crew them. So basically, you're just crewing them to reduce the cost for Ghalta, and then they're uncrewed when they're on your opponent's turn. So if they board wipe, your vehicles stay. Ghalta might die, but you can easily recast Ghalta because you can just recrew your vehicles the next turn. So Smuggler's Copter, vehicles like that, they're running a ton of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically, again, vehicles that provide a good amount of power for their cost are huge for this deck. You also want things that can crew the vehicles efficiently, but also can protect themselves too, like a Mishra's Factory. It's a land. Basically, you can just pay 1 to turn to a 2/2, so then you can crew your vehicle, which can crew another vehicle, and basically you're just crewing your entire board to get Ghalta out. Gendru the Cedars is another card that you're enchanting a forest and you're making it into a 4/4 by paying 2. And basically, it's just a hard to kill creature because it's only a creature when you want it to be. Again, if your opponent has instant speed removal, they're going to get rid of it, but a board wipe won't hit it. So having that power on the board when you need it is huge. Just having other things that are hard to deal with, like a Predator Ooze that's indestructible and can get bigger on its own, is good as well. But basically, you just want to get Ghalta out, and you can obviously just win through commander damage with Ghalta with something like a Fire Shrieker or whatnot, but you also just want to really utilize Ghalta's power in any way that you can. So Life's Legacy is a good card for that. You basically sacrifice Ghalta, and then you're going to draw cards equal to Ghalta's power, so 12 or even larger at certain points. But basically, yeah, drawing 12 cards for 2 mana is huge. Then you can just recast Ghalta again by just, reducing that cost, reducing her cost with the power on the board. You can also use something like Feed the Pack, which says at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice a non-token creature. If you do, put X 2/2 green wolf creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is sacrifice creature's toughness. Basically, you get Ghalta out for 2 mana. You sacrifice Ghalta, you get 24 2/2 wolves. Next turn, you get Ghalta out for 2 mana. You sacrifice Ghalta, you get 24 more 2/2 wolves. It's not going to take long for you to finish out the game with that. And of course, you can utilize Ghalta's power with something like Overwhelming Stampede, giving all your creatures +12/+12 and trample. Yeah, it's going to end pretty quickly from there. So yeah, Ghalta's been a fun one. Again, it's not you're playing kind of a different strategy, so many people might not see it coming, which can be fun as well. Let's move on to the next one, which is actually not a legal commander, but one that I asked my playgroup ahead of time if they let me do, and I did. So Ink Trader Nephilim, again, not legendary, so not legal, but ask your playgroup if you want to play it. It's a 3/3 Nephilim that costs red, green, white-blue. It says whenever a player plays an instant or sorcery spell, if Inktrader Nephilim is the only target of that spell, copy the spell for each other creature that spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So basically, this is like a Zada, but for everyone's creatures, not just your own. So again, not legal, but I did an episode on why the Nephilim should be legal, but we'll see. Ask your playgroup if you want to play it. It's a ton of fun. Basically, you're just going to run a ton of cheap cantrips like Twisted Image, which is an instant that costs a blue and says switch target creature's power and toughness until end of turn, draw a card. That first part really doesn't matter. There might be certain points where it does, but for the most part, you just want those 1-mana cantrips that just draw you a card. Because again, if you target Inktrader Nephilim with this, it's going to target every single creature on the board, including your opponents, and you're going to draw a ton of cards. So if there's 10 creatures on the board, for 1 mana, you're drawing 10 cards at instant speed. It's pretty cool. Spawning Breath is another way that you can get more creatures on the board. Basically, it's going to deal 1 damage to every single creature on the board, and then you get a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn. You can sacrifice those for mana, but it's also just good to have more bodies on the board. Essentially, you're doubling the number of bodies that are on the board, unless you kill something that has 0 power or 0 toughness. Anyways, regardless, you're putting more creatures on the board to then cantrip more onto. Withstand Death is a cheap kind of 1 mana board wipe protection for everything. Even though it is going to save your opponent's creatures too, that's actually usually a good thing. If someone tries to wipe the board, them setting the creature count down to 0 is not good for you, so just saving everyone's creatures on the board is going to be usually good for you. And then you can finish your opponents off with something like, I say, Kosas Crawler pretty easily. Basically, whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. You're going to be drawing an absurd amount of cards at a certain point. You can just draw into cantrip after cantrip. Drawing 40 plus cards in 1 turn is not hard for this deck. Word of Seizing, you can just gain control of everyone's creatures with Split Second. So yeah, and then just swing out with that. And then there's also other ways too, like Silver for Partisans, one of my favorites. Basically, you're casting your spells that are targeting your everyone's creatures, including your own. So you're just targeting your wolves, creating more wolves, and so on and so forth. And there's just a lot of different ways you can take it. Again, it's a fun deck. Again, not legal commander, so please, if you want to build around that one and play it, ask your playgroup first. Next up, let's go through another one of my recent additions that I've really been enjoying lately. Haven't got to play it too much because of social distancing right now. But basically, this is one that I'm looking forward to really getting into and playing as soon as LGS is open back up. And that's Progenitus. I should have said that to start. So Progenitus is a 10/10 Hydra avatar that costs essentially double Wooburg. It's got protection from everything, and if Progenitus would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle into its owner's library instead. We don't really care about that part. Basically, a 10/10 protection from everything. It's going to be our finisher for a Turbo Fog deck. So basically, Turbo Fog, you're going to be casting fogs like Fog. And basically, you're just preventing combat damage and just saving yourself from anyone swinging at you. Other fogs like Undergrowth, you're running a ton of fogs in this deck. Pretty much all the good viable ones that you can. You're also running kind of like pseudo fogs in this deck too, like your Revenge of Ravens, which says whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Basically, any way that you can disincentivize attacks just to protect yourself until you can get Progenitus out and then really start smacking your opponents is the way to do it. To keep your hand full with more fogs, you're going to use things like Mena's Awakening and other kind of draw engines and draw spells to kind of dig deeper into your deck, keep your hand full, and make sure that you have enough fogs to protect yourself until you can take out players with Progenitus. Nostalgic Dreams, other cards that recur your fogs to get them back are going to be big as well. You also want some ways to pump Progenitus. Progenitus is a 10/10, and it's got protection from everything, and that means even from your stuff too, so you can't target it with anything, you can't equip it with anything, but there are ways to get it to that 11 power, so it is a 2-shot kill. Something like Rhythm of the Wild is great because it's very flexible. It says creature spells you control can't be countered, so that's great. And then also non-token creatures you control have Riot. So basically you can have Progenitus enter either with haste or with a +1/+1 counter. So if you've got another way to get it bigger, great. You can just give it haste and then swing right away. If you want to make sure you get to that 11 power so it's only a 2-shot kill, then give it that counter. But the best one of these actually is going to be Finest Hour, which has Exalted, and whenever a creature you control attacks alone, if it's the first combat phase of the turn, untap that creature. After this phase, there's additional combat phase. Basically, you are going to be able to kill a player in 1 turn with Progenitus with this. Progenitus swings, he's 11/11, you untap, you swing again with a 12/12, that's 23 commander damage, that's dead. Yeah, so Progenitus, a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to playing it more. Next up, we actually got one of my $10 decks. This is going to be the Crushing Quarters deck for Jarad, Golgari Lichlord. Jarad, let's read him real quick. Jarad is a 2/2 zombie elf that costs black, black, green, green. It gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and you can pay 1 black, green to sacrifice another creature. Each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Sacrifice a swamp and a forest. Return Jarad from your graveyard to your hand. So basically, Jarad, with this deck, we want to get big creatures out there, sacrifice them, and drain our opponents out. We can utilize big creatures in different ways. Obviously, Jarad can get big himself, but we can't sacrifice Jarad to his own ability. We are going to want to mill ourselves, though, with things like Mulch or Nyx Weaver, which is a kind of repeatable mill effect that happens every turn. So we can get things into our graveyard. We're going to cast things like Zombify to get some big creatures back out that we can then sacrifice and then use other ways to get back out and then sacrifice again with Jarad. We also are going to use some kind of, I'm not going to say, they're lesser played cards because they're not really too effective for other decks, but for this one, they're great, like a Copperhoof Vorak. It gets +1/+1 for each untapped permanent your opponents control. So if they've got a ton of untapped things, this is going to get huge just for 5 mana, and then you can just sacrifice to Jarad. And if your opponents have to, tap mana in response to try to get it smaller, you're going to be making them waste the resources and use them in less efficient ways. Things like Revenant, with Revenant's power and toughness equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Again, utilizing your graveyard in a different way just to get more things into your graveyard, bring them back, sacrifice things that get bigger based on things in your graveyard. There's even ones that get bigger based on all creatures in all graveyards too, so those can be really huge at draining your opponents out. Kintree Invocation is just a simple way to get a creature out that's going to be another one of your biggest creatures for just 2 mana. So if that's Jarad, if that's something else, you just basically get a second copy of that you can then just sacrifice. Vehicle is going to be big in this as well because vehicles, again, can be protected essentially when they're not creatures. So you can just utilize them when you need to. You can crew them up, sacrifice them, and then, yeah, your opponents, it's hard to deal with. Phytotitan is a fantastic card in this deck. Creatures that can actually just recur themselves. Essentially, when Phytotitan dies, it just comes back at the beginning of the next end step. Your next end step. Your next end step. Anyway, you can just keep sacrificing it over and over again. Ways to drain your opponents out. Again, it's a very budget deck. It was $10 when it was initially built. I believe it's $10 or less. And each card was 25 cents or less when it was initially built. So there's obviously ways that you can improve on it, but it's a very solid deck to start. And it's just one that I like to pull out when, let's say I need a kind of lower power level deck against opponents. I can just pull that one out. Budget doesn't always mean power level. There are obviously certain commanders that lend themselves more towards being powerful no matter what the budget is, essentially. And we'll get to one of those in a bit. But yeah, once you get into those $10 ranges, your deck's probably going to be a little less effective than it would be at 50. So yeah, if I need to kind of lower my power level, this is one I go for. Another one I go for is Marwyn the Nurturer, which is another one of my Crushed Quarters deck. Crushing Quarters? Goodness gracious, sorry, I'm losing it. Marwyn is a 1/1 elf druid that costs 2 and a green, and it says whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Marwyn the Nurturer, and you can tap her to add an amount of green equal to her power. Basically, a lot of people like to play this elf tribal. I wanted to take it in a slightly different direction that kind of focused on just getting her power as big as you can and then tapping her for a lot of mana and finding ways to untap her and then tap her again, just getting her very big for at least one turn and then taking advantage of her power. So things like Bort Umbra are great because they pump her up. They give her +3/+3 and as totem armor, so it protects her too. Gigantomancer and things like that basically just affect her base power and toughness. So it turns into a 7/7, which is basically, since she starts off at a 1/1, just giving her +6/+6 for just 1 mana. It's big. Burst of Strength and other cards like it are going to untap her, and the best ones obviously are going to cost 1. You're running a ton in this deck, ones that are repeatable, ones that, just instant speed cost 1. To untap her, to tap her again for a ton of mana. Ways to protect her and also pump her, like Moral's Resolve, can come in huge as well. And then, again, you just want to get her as big as possible, and you can win through commander damage if you need to. So something like Prodigious Growth, which gives her +7/+7 in Trample, is huge. Ursipine is a fantastic card in this deck. It lets you fully utilize the mana that she makes. Basically, Ursipine has pay a green, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So you tap Marwyn for, let's say, 40 mana. You put all except for one of that mana into Ursipine to pump Marwyn back up by 39/39. She's a 79/79 now, and then you pay that extra mana to untap her with something else, and then you can tap her for 79 mana. So it's just, you can do a ton of cool things. Again, it's a budget deck, so you're kind of restricted on what finishers you have, but Centaur Glade can be a great finisher as well, just utilizing all that mana to make a ton of Centaurs and overwhelm your opponents with that. There's a lot of different directions that you can take it. And again, if you want to upgrade it, it's a nice $10 budget to start. So there's plenty of things that you can use to upgrade it and to make it more effective. And there's new cards being printed too that untap or that help get damage through. So look for those as well. Let's go to actually my next one, which many people have asked, what's the most powerful deck in your collection? I'd still have to say this one's it. It's Jhoira, Weatherlight Captain. This is actually one that I had built before I had a YouTube channel even, and I've made adjustments throughout the years. But basically, Jhoira is pretty disgusting. It is what many people call a solitaire deck, where you are going to be having some very, very long turns on your own. So if your playgroup's not okay with that, then make sure you kind of ask beforehand. And this is one that I really don't pull out unless playing against, unless kind of everyone agrees that everyone's playing their highest level power deck, and people are okay with playing against kind of, again, a deck that can be a very solitaire deck. So what you're trying to do is you're going to try to get out a ton of artifacts, get them back to your hand, recast them, and so on and so forth. Jhoira draws you a card whenever you cast an artifact. Actually, whenever you cast a historic spell. Let's just read it real quick. Jhoira is a 3/3 human artificer that costs 2 blue-red. Whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. So historic spells are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. This deck's going to focus on artifacts, obviously. So basically, you get things out like Artificer's Assistant, which give you another benefit whenever you cast an artifact. It says whenever you cast a historic spell, scry 1. You want to get a lot of cost reducers out there, like Foundry Inspector, which just makes your artifact spells cost less. Again, the less you have to pay for artifacts, the more that you can cast either for free or at a reduced cost, and you can cast more in a turn, and you just can storm off that way. You're going to be running a ton of mana rocks in this deck. Again, once you've got enough cost reducers out there, you can even cast your mana rocks for free at a certain point, just netting you mana when they come into play, drawing you a card with Jhoira, and continuing your turn. Simple artifacts like Guild Globe are great. That just essentially cantrip when they come into play, so you're just drawing a card. You've also got other ones like Aether Spellbomb that you can just sacrifice to draw cards once you need that extra fuel. And then again, you want to cast something like a Retract to bring your artifacts all back to your hand, recast them all again, draw a ton of cards with Jhoira, and then basically just storm off with something like Temporal Fissure, bouncing all of your opponent's permanents, including lands, back to their hands, and then they lose. Again, this can be a very long turn when you do that, so yeah, make sure you're considering that before, actually kind of building this deck, and make sure you're talking to your playgroup ahead of time, because that is one that can, definitely rub some people wrong if you're not careful ahead of time. So my next one is going to be Golos, which I've talked about before in a couple of different episodes. This one is probably my favorite deck to play. It's one that I've tuned around with quite a bit. Basically, let's go with Golos real quick. Golos is a 3/5 scout for 5. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a land card, put that card into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library, and you can pay 2 Wooburg and exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn without paying their mana cost. So basically, you're casting things off the top of your library for free. Golos can be built in a lot of different ways. Some people build Golos Maze's End because you can go get that land. I just built it with a lot of value and synergy, casting things off the top, trying to cast a ton of things off the top over and over and over again. So basically, you want to ramp a ton. So obviously, things like Wayfarer's Bauble. Yay, Wayfarer's Bauble. Come in huge for that. You're going to run a lot of ramp spells. You also want to clear the board to keep yourself safe, but you don't want to completely wipe the board because you want Golos to be safe. So board wipes like Doom Blast come in huge, which is say, choose up to 1 creature, destroy the rest. You don't want to blow up Golos because you don't want to have to keep recasting Golos, but there are plenty of board wipes out there like Doom Blast that just blow up everything else essentially, or almost everything else, and keep Golos safe. You want to be able to set the top of your library things like Reclaim or Brainstorm, so you kind of know what you're going to be spinning the wheel into with Golos and then casting off the top. You really want to hit things like Rude Awakening, which untap your lands, so basically you can just deactivate Golos again, maybe another 2 or 3 times in the same turn potentially. And then you want to get big things out like Swarm Intelligence, which basically just copy your instants and sorceries that you cast. So again, if you hit that Rude Awakening, congratulations, you've got 2 copies of it, and now you can activate Golos a ton. You want to hit other really big value things off the top like Aminatu's Augury, which help you cast even more things for free. And then you can finish off opponents in many different ways. In this deck specifically, Doomsday is kind of the finisher for this. So basically, you just stack your library and the 5 cards that you need to stack them in the order that you need to stack them, and then you can just cast them with Golos in an absurd amount of times to damage your opponents out or whatnot. It's all in the deck tech video on kind of how that stack exactly works. This is one that I do, and I actually really want to highlight this one because it is, again, not as high-powered as Jhoira, I wouldn't say, but it is up there in power level because if you hit the right cards off the top, you're going to have some really explosive turns. So basically, this is one where I'm starting to kind of make a separate stack of cards that I'm going to be kind of switching in and out depending on the power level that I'm playing with. If I'm playing against a bunch of new players, I might, if I still want to play this, I'm going to switch out those extra turn spells, the untap land spells, the Doomsday. for some more friendly spells, I guess. Maybe something like a Storm Herd that just makes tokens or whatnot. But basically, and I'm sure that's not a great example because that can kill a lot of people too. But basically, you're going to have ways to make it more flexible. I really like this deck, and I want to play it a ton, but I realize that not every play group wants to play against, the way that it's currently built. So, you can always just have kind of like a sideboard that you switch out between games. So that leads me to my very last deck that I built recently, and I don't have a deck tech on it yet because it's actually, I don't know if I want to spoil too much on this, but basically, okay, it's Rarity. So Rarity is, again, like Inktrader Nephilim, not an actual legal commander. Let's just go through it real quick. Rarity is a 2/2 unicorn that costs 1 white-blue. It says rare mythic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and you can pay 1 and tap it to reveal a My Little Pony toy that you own. Until end of turn, another target creature gains protection from each color of that toy's coat, mane, and outfit. This was kind of like not a joke deck, but a deck that was built for another episode that you'll see in the near-ish future, most likely. And so I'm not going to try to spoil too much about what that deck's about. Because Rarity is not a legal commander, like Inktrader Nephilim, there's not really, again, an exact card that does what Rarity does. Basically, the deck is going to be built around kind of reducing the cost of your rares and mythic spells. Again, there's no other card that really does that. So I tried to just kind of have, and this is another kind of way that you can do it if you, have a commander that you want to build, but it's not technically legal. You can have kind of like a backup commander, and this is Daxos Emeritus, essentially just a nice budget kind of replacement commander that you can use for it. Again, it's not a high-powered deck. It's just a deck for fun. So if someone's not okay with playing against Rarity, I can just switch out and say, okay, then I'll just use Daxos as my commander, and the rest of the deck is 100% legal, so it's completely fine. Again, I don't want to spoil too much on that one. It is an episode that's going to happen in the near-ish future, so you'll see that. And I believe this episode is going to come out before that. So again, trying not to spoil too much. But yeah, that's a deck that I've been enjoying playing just, again, for a much lower kind of power level, just trying to have a good time. And I'm trying to have a good time with Commander in general, but just, a lower power level game. You're not going to pull out Jhoira. You're not going to pull out Golos. You'll pull out this one and just have a good time. So again, I like to have a wide variety of decks. These decks will switch out. I'm sure by the end of this year, I'll have, either another 1 or 2 decks that I've gotten. I'll switch out another one of these. But yeah, I'd love to hear, what your thoughts on these decks are. What decks, I guess, these are your favorites. So yeah, let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you thought about this episode. Yeah, and just thanks again and have a good one. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.